Hello everyone, I am Laethas and welcome back to another video, and today I have my top 10 Manga for Beginners, or the top 10 list you guys chose for my 1000 subscriber special. Of course, the top 10 list option 1 on my Twitter poll, and the reply with the most amount of likes was for top 10 Manga for Beginners. Now, this list is not in any particular order, and in order to be included in this list, I have to own the series and have read a significant amount of the material that is currently out. So certain series that I may own may not be on this list that you might think are correct, but that might just because I have not gotten to reading much of those series, or at least the total amount of the series that are there. Plus, I may not have thought they were as beginner-friendly as you may have thought. But we're going to start this list out strong with a short 7-volume series, A Silent Voice by Yoshitoki Oima. Now, I am sure that a lot of you are not very surprised to see this series on this list. A Silent Voice is talked about quite a great deal from a number of people. Even has a film that I personally think is excellent and would highly recommend watching. But the manga is also very, very good, and it's one that just about anyone can enjoy. I haven't really heard of anyone not liking this series, and it is only 7 volumes, and Kodansha has also put out a box set for this series, which makes it very, very easy to pick it up sort of all in one go. And since it is only 7 volumes in Kodansha's sort of standard size format, the series is not very expensive when compared to a lot of other series of the same sort of length and of the same amount of material you sort of get in this series. But overall, very well-rounded, solid story. Without getting into too much spoiler territory or details, this is very much a story about forgiveness and redemption, and just, it's very well-rounded. It's hard to pick out things that are very bad with this series. There are maybe like a few things here and there that I thought could have been better, but overall, it really does dot its I's and cross its T's. Very, very hard to poke holes in my opinion, and it also being well-rounded in the sense that anyone can really enjoy this. As I've said, I haven't really heard of anyone not liking this series, so no question that A Silent Voice was going to be on this list. Next up, I have maybe a surprise for some of you, maybe not for others, but I have the 8-volume series, Parasite, by Kodansha Comics. This is also another series that has an anime adaptation. However, unlike A Silent Voice, this series has a, I want to say, 24 to 26 episode anime series produced by Studio Madhouse. I highly recommend you check that out as well. It has been modernized, so there are differences between this series and that series in sort of the setting, because again, the anime decided to take modern takes on what the original source material was doing, which I think was a good choice. But we're talking about the manga right now. But for those who don't know, Parasite is a very influential series. It was one of the very first sort of more well-known sort of seinen series that sort of inspired a lot of other creators to do similar things. And what's really neat about this series is its sort of moral messages and theming behind it, having to deal with what it means to be human, you know, tough moral decisions that you have to make, what is right, what is wrong, and that sort of thing, and our dynamic between our main character, who is a human, and this parasite alien creature that has sort of infected his arm and has become his arm, that is this sort of unfeeling, sort of utilitarian sort of being that exists within him. And it's between sort of their different ideas on what is and is not moral, and sort of what is the right thing to do, or should you do the wrong thing at certain times in order for some other thing to be right, other things like that. So it's a very unique take on sort of morality and that kind of stuff. And with it only being 8 volumes, and you do get quite a lot of story, because these are much, much thicker volumes. You can see it definitely is an older series. but still one very worth reading, and you can definitely see its inspiration in other works that follow it. So it's really hard to say no to this series. Has an excellent anime adaptation. Cannot really recommend this enough. And for a newcomer, it's very, very beginner friendly. Next up, I have a series that is very long in respect to all the other series that I've sort of listed thus far, or that I will be listing. And that is going to be the series at 27 volumes long, Claymore. Now, while the series may be 27 volumes long, which is very long, it does, or it is available in a box set. So you can get all 27 volumes in one purchase for a considerably cheaper price than paying for each of the singles individually. And the series is a high fantasy. I'm not quite sure if I want to go with epic, but it's sort of leaning in that direction. But this is more of a sort of high fantasy hack and slash. You're going to watch some cool action. There are going to be some fights. There's going to be some interesting moral dilemmas that our characters experience, especially as it gets into sort of the mid to late section. Now, there is a time skip that does happen sort of towards the middle of the series, and there is sort of a little bit of a shift in tone as to what is going on. But one of the reasons that I like to recommend this series is because one of the arcs that transpires sort of towards the very beginning, I want to say between volumes 4 and 6, is when the arc sort of takes place. And it's a very, very well done backstory that I haven't seen too many series sort of rival this sort of backstory that I've seen, and sort of character development into why the characters are sort of motivated to do the things that they are doing. And I feel that with this backstory and sort of you getting to have an idea of why our main character Claire is doing the things she's doing, it gives you something to sort of side with her on and something to support her with, which is really, really helpful for the series and healthy for it, because you're not just watching characters do things that you don't quite know why they're doing them, or their motivations seem sort of weak or ambiguous, but you really get a good sense of why that she wants to do the things that she's doing, and you can really feel sort of the emotions that she might be experiencing and why she wants to reach the goals that she's reaching. And that will continue throughout the story. There is a brief period of time where she doesn't appear, which I feel is a little it's not as good of a quality as most of the series is, but the series overall is very, very good in its sort of like action. The art is very, very good as it gets into the later volumes. Even towards the beginning, you can still see, like, right there, sort of the detail that the author has put into this series. It's not the best artwork that you may have ever seen, but it is certainly very good. And if you're looking for a high fantasy or a series with a lot of action, then this is definitely one I would recommend picking up. Next up, I have a little bit of an odd recommendation maybe from some of you. This is a series released by Kodansha Comics in 2 volumes, and they're also in hardcovers, and that would be The Black Museum, The Ghost, and The Lady. Now, this series, some of you are going to love, and some of you aren't going to enjoy as much. However, I still think it's a very good beginner series, especially if you're a fan of sort of historical fiction or series sort of taking a liberal take on sort of historical figures or events, that kind of thing. And if you like really interesting and good art, then I think this series has some very, very, very unique style in sort of how it displays its artwork, and it's definitely up there, top tier artwork. And it definitely has its very unique style. Not only that, but there are 2, well, kind of like 1.5 in 1 hardcovers for $20, so they are some hardcovers at some good deals. And the story follows sort of an event in Florence Nightingale's life. If you don't know who that is, you will find out if you read this series. But if you are a big history fan, this might be a series you really like. Or if you're just someone who really likes sort of things dealing with historical events or in a historical setting, this is also a series I think you will enjoy. Now, The Black Museum has 2 stories currently out. The Ghost and the Lady, which is published by Kodansha. And then there's another series in the Black Museum series that isn't published in English. But do know that I'm talking about The Ghost and the Lady specifically. And this is only 2 volumes, so it's very quick to pick up. Though the series itself is fairly dense, there's a good amount of dialogue per page. So you do get a lot of story sort of in the series itself. But yeah, you can just see the artwork, see the detail, and sort of the settings in like there as well. Very, very interesting take on sort of a historical setting and historical figure. And that is sort of more the reason that I would recommend this. It's short, but the volumes are good quality, and the series is very, very interesting, especially if you are big into history. Next up, I have a series you may be familiar with because it recently got an anime adaptation by Wit Studio, and that is The Ancient Magus Bride. Now, this series is much calmer, for the most part, than a lot of the series that I've shown before. It's more whimsical in nature, more mysterious. It has more of that mysterious sort of intrigue that than the other series. But this series has exploded in popularity recently. And unfortunately, we are almost caught up with the Japanese release. I believe there are 9 volumes out in Japan, and we are on volume 8 in English. So you do get to be sort of a part of that conversation as the series progresses, if you decide to get into this series now. But also with the thought that an anime series just aired, and it got very good reviews. I think it has over an 8 on my anime list, which usually means the series is very good. Now might be a time to get into this series or watch the anime series that is sort of based on this work. Now, I didn't personally enjoy this first volume as much as a lot of other people did. However, I would advise sticking with it through the second volume, because that is where I found a lot of the intrigue that this series sort of offers, and it's really just very fascinating, the world that Kore Yamazaki has created, and sort of wanting to uncover the mysteries of it alongside Chise, because she is not necessarily exactly as confused or ignorant as the reader might be, but she's around your same knowledge level when it comes to all the things that are happening around her, and so you sort of get to experience this world alongside of her, which is very, very interesting and a very unique, well, maybe not unique, but different sort of take on a story where you as the reader know basically the same information that your main character does. So I really like that, and I think it's a very interesting way to sort of tell this story and explain the world and what's going on. So definitely one I would recommend, but I would give it a couple of volumes before you make your final decision on this series. Next up, I have a shoujo recommendation. This is 13 volumes long, and it is complete. However, this is a very, very quick read. There is not very much dialogue per page, so you can read through these volumes very, very quickly, and that is Dawn of the Arcana. And this is a shoujo series that is less focused on sort of romance and that kind of thing. It doesn't take place in high school. As a matter of fact, it takes place in a fictional world, fictional fantasy world with demi-humans and humans, and it sort of follows this princess and her problems with dealing with the politics of her world and sort of feuding nations that are going on, as she is basically forced to marry the prince of the other nation that they are constantly feuding with in order to stay peaceful. However, the king and queen of that other country are not very fond of her, and they kind of would like to take over their country. But it's very interesting sort of take on sort of politics is what the majority of the series sort of focuses on. However, it is the tragedy that you sort of get to see unfold as the story reaches its end that really pushes this series into sort of it makes this series into a better series than it would have been had it just tried to focus on that one element of sort of politics and persuasion that you have going on, and sort of the mingling of alliances and allegiances that you do get to see, and it's very, very interesting. So even if you are not a fan of shoujo, I definitely recommend picking up this series. It is definitely very unique in sort of its take on things. And next up, I have a series that I'm sure you are all aware of, and that is what's right in front of you right now, Tokyo Ghoul. Now, Tokyo Ghoul just ended at 16 volumes, so the first season of Tokyo Ghoul is 14 volumes, with being 16 volumes, so the series in its entirety is 30 volumes long. However, I'm just going to be focusing on this first series, volumes 1 through 14, and I'm sure you have heard of this series before. It has one anime adaptation and then Route A, which kind of did its own thing, so that was a little strange. Some of you might like it, some of you might not, but the series is nonetheless highly popular, and it has its own sort of intrigue of its own, and while it does have a lot of edge to it, I feel like it isn't, or at least not always, trying to be edgy for the sake of being edgy, because the world that these people are inhabiting is one of a lot of strife and conflict, so sort of the dark moments that happen do seem to fit the narrative of the story and make sense for who the characters are, what they're doing, and sort of their emotions and perspective on certain issues. And so the characters behave in ways that would make sense for characters existing in this world. But another reason I would recommend this series is because of the sort of way that Sui Ishida has developed his characters in this series, which is very, very... he gives a lot of personality and humanity to his characters that you don't always see in a lot of series. You get a lot of time alone with these characters, which really helps you build sort of like an identity for them and who they are and why they behave the ways they do, and allows you to sort of guess as to how they might behave in the future given certain circumstances. So that is very unique. This series is also published in Young Jump, which is a seinen magazine. However, it has more of a younger feel to it than like a Berserk. So it really fits into that range between a shonen and a seinen very well. It has a little bit of the shonen tropes going along in it, but it also isn't afraid to deal with more mature themes that you might find in a seinen series. So I think it really blends the two demographics together very well. And I'm sure you've already heard of it. There's lots of people to talk about with this series, and with it being 14 volumes long and a sequel series that has just recently wrapped up is definitely a good place to start. As well as the fact that Viz Media has recently announced a box set for this series, I believe coming out either in September or October, I believe. I can't remember exactly which month, but very soon you'll be able to pick up the entire series for a discounted price, as opposed to just picking up the volumes individually. And next up, I have another series you're looking at, and you might be confused, what series might I be talking about, and that would be What a Wonderful World by Inio Asano. Now, this is a very easy to get into Inio Asano work, and with it being only 2 volumes, it's definitely one I recommend. The volumes themselves are very nice, and it's a series of short stories that both are and are not connected at the same time, and it really gives you a sense of Inio Asano's style of sort of storytelling without some of maybe the objectionable content that something like Goodnight Punpun or Oyasumi Punpun or A Girl on the Shore have, nor is it as confusing as Nijigahara Holograph. So, Inio Asano being a very sort of well-respected mangaka with several works released in English, you're going to find a lot of people to talk about his stuff with, and What a Wonderful World is a good place to get started without sort of getting into some of the more darker elements of his storytelling or the more sort of poignant or confusing elements that his storytelling sometimes tends to have. This one is more, not necessarily down to earth, but easy to understand and grasp, and it isn't really going to require too many rereads, if any, to sort of get his message that's going across. So What a Wonderful World is definitely a place I would recommend starting for Inio Sano, especially at only 2 volumes. And since it is a series of short stories, that does make it much easier to read, since you can sort of read one and come back later without really losing a whole lot, because while the stories themselves are connected, they're not one-to-one. They don't go one right into the other, but they are connected through sort of the character interactions. One character from one story will know another character that appears in another story and sort of connects the 2 stories together in sort of this very unique sort of 6 degrees of separation way that I find very interesting, and I haven't really ever seen done before. So I definitely recommend What a Wonderful World by Inio Asano. Next up, I have a little bit of a personal recommendation of mine, because I like to spread the gospel that is Yuri, and so I have Girlfriends. Now, this is a very much romance series, so if you're not wanting a romance series, maybe don't get into this one right now, but if you are looking for a romance, Girlfriends is definitely one I highly, highly recommend, because it really shows sort of the conflict that these 2 girls have with being in love with one another in a world that maybe isn't the most accepting of that, or is the most knowledgeable sort of that. And so you really get to see the wide range of emotions that these characters face. What will other people think? What do they think themselves? What will their parents think? That kind of thing. What are they going to do in the future? Is she going to think I'm weird if I tell her these things? And so you get to see a very wide range of sort of romance tropes that you may see in other series, but the conflicts that these characters sort of are dealing with emotionally and psychologically make a lot more sense and have a lot more sort of reality to them because of the specific situation that these 2 characters are in, as opposed to some other romance series. So if you are wanting to get into a romance series, I highly recommend getting into Girlfriends, and it is published by 7 Seas in these 2 omnibus collections, so it is very quick to get the entire series and read it. 2 of these omnibus collections, but there were 5 volumes released in Japan, so there were 2.5 volumes in each of these. But Girlfriends is definitely a series I recommend if you're interested in a romance series. It is definitely a good place to get started, especially for Yuri. And the last series I have on this list is only a single volume, but a single volume of incredible quality, in my personal opinion, and of the opinions of a lot of people as well, and that has to be Satoshi Kon's Opus, an excellent series dealing with the blending of fiction and reality. What is real? What isn't real? What makes something real? What makes it not real? Would the characters in a series know anything about the real world? What if reality and fiction turned out to be the same thing? What if fiction is interfering with reality? And how do we know if it's real or not real? This series does an excellent job of merging a story writer with his story and sort of dealing with sort of the complications that might have in a way that seems perfect, that it's a perfect fit, and it seems totally realistic, even though the premise is just unfathomable and not possible. But the series does an excellent job at blending these 2 worlds, and Satoshi Kon has not just done an excellent job with this series itself, but the series that the mangaka in this series is writing is also a very compelling series in it of itself that I would love to see sort of written just on its own. So having the author of the series in his series write a series that is just as believable as any other series really helps add to that sort of ambiguity of what is real and what is fake. that I've never really seen before. And the ending of this series, while some might not like, I think fits sort of the ideas of this series perfectly and how it sort of finishes itself up. I'm not going to spoil anything about the ending, but I think the way that it ends is a perfect fit to the style of story that this is. So, while some of you might be disappointed, I feel that this may have been one of the best ways for the series to end. But if you have not picked up Opus yet, I highly recommend it. It's only one volume, and it's probably going to be one of the best series that you have ever read, or maybe even one of the best stories you have ever been told. Yeah, my last manga for beginners, Satoshi Kon's Opus. Really easy to get into, but a lot of depth and sort of interesting ideas that are at play that I've never really seen sort of delved into in as much detail or with as much fluidity and craft and intelligence as Opus has been done with. But yeah, that will do it for this list of top 10 manga for beginners. Let me know your thoughts on any of the series that I listed in this video. What are some of your top 10 manga for beginners to get into, and sort of what are your criteria for what does it mean for a series to be good for beginners? What makes it good versus what makes it maybe not so good for someone who's just starting out? But yeah, thank you guys so much for 1,000 subscribers. Let me know your thoughts on any of the series I listed, or what series you want to see, sort of as your personal thoughts on sort of this list. You can leave all those down in the comments below. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you want to follow me on Twitter, there's a link to that in the description down below, which is how this poll and all this stuff sort of came to be. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I am Laethas. Goodbye.